Hey everyone, sorry about that. Starting a little bit late. Had some technical difficulties, and you know, that's how it goes. But I am excited to be with you tonight to look at Noah or Noah, right? We're going to be looking at this Torah portion. Oh, there's so much good stuff in here. I wish I had more time than just an hour to get through it, but we're going to do our very best to get through this phenomenal passage. All right. So we're going to be looking at Noah, right? We're looking at, of course, the flood. Right now, last week, which we didn't have time to get to, we would have been at, guess what, the time of the Nephilim. So I'm going to take just a moment and get into that really quickly because, well, it's such a cool topic. It's hard to skip that one when it's just so much fun. All right, so let's jump in right here. Guys, go ahead and let me know that you are there in the chat. I'd love to see that. Great, I got some comments already. Fantastic. Glad you're with me. Okay, let's get started. So now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, that they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. All right, so William Whiston is the translator of Josephus. He said that this was the universal position in the first century, that fallen angels had come and taken women, and they had created this this hybrid race. Right, so that was universally accepted in the first century. So that's kind of an interesting fact, right? And the Lord said, "My spirit will not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." There were giants or Nephilim on the earth in those days, and also after, when the sons of God came to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men of old, men who were of old, men of renown. All right, so now I've written 3 books on this topic, so I'm not going to go into a terrible amount of detail because we don't have time. But if you want to check those out, Corrupting the Image 1, 2, and 3. All right, I go into lots of detail. So if you want to check those out, I encourage you to do that. But I wanted to go back and just touch on this a little bit, because sometimes when we come to the part where it talks about Noah and the whole thing about the flood, you're like, wait, why did God decide to flood the world? I mean, that seems like a really mean thing to do. Well, because there were bad people on the earth, and not just people that weren't so nice to each other, but there were genetic hybrids on the earth that were causing all kinds of havoc. And that was the main reason that God destroyed the world. Certainly people breaking his laws, etc., that was part of the problem. Okay. But this whole thing about the Nephilim, that was the really big deal that God had to deal with. And frankly, it's good that he did, or the whole world would have been utterly and genetically destroyed. And I do believe, as it was in the days of Noah, so it'll be at this coming of the Son of Man, that we're talking about this repeat. We're going to have a repeat of the Nephilim. Yeah, so that's not so good. All right, so then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and birds of the air. For I'm sorry that I've made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. All right. So that's really important. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God, and Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. All right, this is super duper significant. Let's take a look at this, right? So, ותשחט הארץ לפני האלוהים, ותמלא הארץ Hamas. All right, so the earth is full of violence, right? The same word there for Hamas, the terrorist group in Palestine or Israel. Now, so that's really interesting, but it also says, Tishachet ha'aretz lifnei ha'elohim. The earth was also corrupt. What happened? Vaya Elohim et ha'aretz vehine nishchata ki hit kol basar et darko al ha'aretz. All right, so God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. Now, what's interesting, if we look in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the book of Giants, it talks about how these giants did miscegenations, which is crossbreeding, and they created monsters. All right, so that's what the book of Giants suggests. That's, of course, a commentary or just an idea of what they thought was happening, but this really seems to be what the Bible is actually saying, right? That it wasn't just a moral thing, but there was a corruption of the flesh. What would have corrupted that? Well, we go back to Genesis 6, chapter 1, where the sons of God, that is fallen angels, came and they took the daughters of men and they created this hybrid race called the felling ones. Really, the Nephilim is probably the Hephil, and it means to cause something to fall, or we might say to fell a tree. That's the basic idea. So these were fellers, young fellers. I'm just joking. All right. So then God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, and the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. All right. So you notice here, because all the flesh had corrupted their way, not just in a moral sense that clearly was there, but they had done something to their flesh. They had corrupted their flesh. And so God is saying, okay, this is it. The end of all flesh has come before me. This is why he brought the flood. All right. So because they did something really bad. And I believe that in the last days, that's what we're going to have is a repeat of that, of where humanity is going to corrupt their flesh one more time in a very big and bad way. Call it interspeciation, call it hybridization, all these new terms, but it's basically they're going to make themselves into Nephilim. I think the mark of the beast is going to be the apparatus that will bring all of that about. And again, I talk about that in Crypt the Image Volume 3 and lots of details. If you guys want to check that out, please avail yourself of one of those books or get all three. All right, make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, cover it inside and outside with pitch, and this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits. So a cubit is probably 20 inches. Some people suggest 18 inches, but I'm pretty convinced that it's 20 inches. Probably talking about the Egyptian royal cubit. That's probably the one that Moses would have used when he was recording all of this. That's my speculation, but that's probably the case. All right, so that puts the ark around 460, 470 feet, somewhere in there. This is a huge vessel, especially that it was probably made out of wood. I mean, he does say make it out of wood, right? Go for wood, right? So it's definitely not made out of metal. It's made out of wood. And that's an incredible thing. Now, people say, oh, that's impossible. There's no way they could have done that. Well, go check out the Ark experience at the Answers in Genesis Museum in Kentucky, and you will see a life-size replica. And Tim Levitt, who did a lot of the research for that, found some incredible things where he was able to discover that the different ancient methods of shipbuilding, and so he did the whole thing without any metal nails or screws or any of those kinds of things. And it's a very seaworthy boat. All right, it really is. So that's just absolutely fantastic. Okay, you shall make a window in the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. All right, so there's 3 decks to this thing. All right, so this is a very sizable ship. And behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. All right, God makes that very clear. Everything that has breath in it, everything that's on the earth, he's going to say it again, everything under heaven is going to die. So there's this idea that somehow the Nephilim hitched a ride on the side of the boat. Well, that would be very much contrary to what God is saying right here. So it says in First Peter that only 8 souls, actually in Second Peter, only 8 souls were saved. That is Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives. Okay, so 8 people made it on the boat. Only 8 people survived. This tells you there was something incredibly drastic happening back in those days. If God is a God of love, and hint, hint, I think he is. Why would he do something so terrible? Is it God was really kind of a meanie back then and then he turned over a new leaf? I don't think that's the case. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So a lot of times when people come to this chapter, they gloss right over the Nephilim part. Oh, that's just, slightly tall people or something like that. But no, there was a whole genetic hybridization program that was going on. Again, I talk about that in great detail in Corrupting Image Volume 2. So this is the reason why God destroyed the earth, is that you had miscegenation, or you had a hybridization program where you had humanoid beings that were being produced that were not really human. And that stood to destroy the whole human race. And that's why I called my books Corrupting the Image, because that is what I believe Satan was really trying to do, is to corrupt the image that God had placed in man and corrupt it and then replace it with his own. That's essentially his big plan. And I think he's going to do that in the future as well. All right. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. And you shall take for yourself of all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. Thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did. Then the Lord said to Noah, come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. You shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal, a male and his female, 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female. Wait a second. So even back here, we have clean and unclean. All right, you're going to take 7 of every clean animal. How would Noah know? The Bible doesn't specifically tell us how he was supposed to know what the clean animals were and what the unclean animals were, unless, newsflash, maybe, just maybe, God had already established that what animals were clean and unclean. I'm not saying that they were eating those animals, because that does not seem to be the case. However, it's very likely that God had already established, sheep, cows, chickens, these are clean, and camels, dogs, etc. are unclean. All right, pork as well. All right, pigs those are unclean. All right, so God already said, look, these are unclean, these are clean. Now, why he would have said that early on, even though they were not eating them, I cannot be entirely certain. But that they already knew this, it's right here in Scripture. Okay, so if God indeed said this to Noah, then he already said clean and unclean, and that means that Noah must have had an understanding of what clean and unclean actually meant. All right, and goodness, I think he did. Also 7 each of birds of the air, male and female, to keep the species alive on the face of all the earth. For after 7 more days, I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made. So notice here the number 40. This is the number that we see with judgment, right? Israel had to wander for 40 days in the wilderness. Jesus is in the wilderness 40 days while he was being tempted during the time of his fasting, right? 40 is a number that we see a lot. It has to do with judgment. And so here, 40 days and 40 nights. This is telling us that this is judgment. Obviously, if anything is judgment, this is judgment. And Noah did according to all that the Lord had commanded him. Now, Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters were on the earth. So Noah, with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives, went into the ark because of the waters of the flood, of clean animals, of animals that are unclean, of birds, and of everything that creeps on the earth. 2 by 2, they went into the ark to Noah, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. All right, so notice here that the animals are coming in. Noah didn't have to go out and, try to catch all these animals himself. That would be ridiculous. God brought the animals to Noah. He brought them. They came to him. And that means that God obviously brought in 7 of the clean animals and 7 pairs of clean animals, and then 2 by 2 of the other animals. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were on the earth in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. All right, so I do subscribe to the goodness. I'm trying to think of the theory. Oh my goodness, it's the basic idea that the fountains of the great deep broke open, that there were waters underneath the earth, under the crust of the earth. The hydroplate theory. There we go. Walt Brown came up with that. So Walt Brown, hydroplate theory, that when this happened, you had all this subterranean water. I mean, lots of subterranean water that was then forced up, and it was under so much pressure, it shot up high into the air, and then it eventually would come back down. Well, certainly as rain. Maybe in some parts it came down as ice. It's entirely possible. That could explain why mammoths were just frozen solid with food still in their mouth. All right, they're perfectly preserved. How did this happen? Quite possibly it's because of the water that went up, and then it came down super fast, super cold, and it froze them instantaneously. I think it's a pretty good theory myself. It may not explain everything, but I think it does have the power to explain a lot of what we see in nature and also of the biblical text. All right. So on the very same day, Noah and Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons were with them, entered the ark. They and every beast after its kind, all cattle after their kind, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, every bird of every sort. And they went into the ark to Noah, 2 by 2 of all flesh, in which is the breath of life. So those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. The Lord shut the door. That's kind of cool. All right. The Lord shut the door. So what we know about this is that Noah went in there. They had a space of 7 days. Of course, the animals are coming in, and then God shuts the door. All right. Now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters, and the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed 15 cubits upward. Okay, so again, we're probably talking about 25, 26 feet water above the highest mountain. They might say, wait a second, Mount Everest is awfully high. Are we really to assume that the water was up some 28,000 feet roughly? Well, no, I don't believe that at all. It says in the Psalms that during the flood, after the flood, I should say, after the flood, the mountains went up and the valleys went down. Because people say, well, wait a second, if the earth was really flooded, where did all the water go? Well, look in the oceans and you will see where the water went. Okay. The ocean water is from the flood. Okay. So that's where a lot of it went. That's where most of it went, is into the ocean, because the mountains went up after the flood and the valleys sank down. Now, before the flood, instead of you having this disparity, you had something more like this. All right. So you did have hills, but you didn't have Mount Everest, for example. All right. You didn't have Mount Kilimanjaro. You didn't have Mount McKinley. All these very, very tall mountains. We didn't have the Rocky Mountain chain back then. Those would have been relatively flat before the flood. And so that's going to make it much easier. Now, the other thing that people suggest is, well, maybe this was just a local flood. Well, again, if it were only a local flood, you've got some problems with that, because water, if you haven't noticed by now, water tends to seek its own level. And unless it's surrounded like a bathtub, it tends to keep on flowing. So, we have the Zagros Mountains in the Middle East. Those are about 11,000 feet. Of course, we have Mount Hermon. That's 9,000 feet. So something's not quite right. if you have water that's up 9,000 or 11,000 feet, again, the water is going to seek its own level. It has to be uniform around the earth at that height. Okay, so this is why it's much easier to understand that the mountains were much smaller back then. They were still there. So, for example, Mount Hermon, which the book of Enoch talks about, which is where the 200 fallen came down in the days of Noah. I do believe that mountain existed. I just think that it got taller after the flood. Okay, same mountain, it just got taller after the flood. But again, we don't know exactly how tall some things were. Okay, so it could be that there were 9,000-foot mountains before the flood. I tend to think probably not the case, but it's hard to say. We can't prove that absolutely. But it was not a local flood because it says under the whole heaven. Under the whole heaven. That is very much a qualifying passage telling you that this thing is, well, it's all over the place. Okay. So we can't really get around that when we're looking at this text. All right. All flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man, here we go again, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, or the breath of the spirit of life. All that was on the dry land died. I think God is telling us that everybody, including all those bad Nephilim, nobody hitched a ride, nobody was holding on to the side of the boat. That did not happen. So he destroyed all living things which were on the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping thing and bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him on the ark remained alive. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. All right, so a lot of great stuff in there. But pretty much what he's trying to say is 8 people made it out. Everybody else died, including all of the animals. Now, people sometimes say, what about all those dinosaurs? Well, I think there's a really funny cartoon by Gary Larson, who does The Far Side. And there's this cartoon where these dinosaurs are out behind a bush and they're smoking. And then they see the ark, lifting up, and they're like, oh no, was that today? It's kind of a funny thing, right? So that's how the dinosaurs went extinct, according to Gary Larson. It's kind of funny. But I would suggest that that there were dinosaurs, small ones, on the ark, right? Remember, they start small, right? Just as babies or even as eggs, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger, as you know. Lizards, which dinosaurs are, just terrible lizards, they continue to grow all their lives. So it's very likely, I believe, that we had enormous dinosaurs that were on the earth before the flood. Probably most of those were just rather nice plant eaters, but some of them may have very well been carnivorous, and they were eating other dinosaurs. They could have been the T-Rexes and such. So then Noah took all that God instructed him, all the ones that came, got on the ark, probably little babies. I suppose it could be eggs, but he'd have to go out and do the egg hunting in that case. But they could have been on the ark for this time. Also, the months really seem to be divided up into 30 days, right? So 150 days is 5 months. How do we know that? Well, because if we go back, it talks about on the second month. Okay, so we have, and the 16th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on this date. Now it's going to keep going until the the 7th month here. All right, so 150 days, right? So then here we go. So the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. Okay, so 5 months, right? 5 times 30 is 150 days. So that's 5 months that this was happening. So that means that we come out on the same day of the 7th month. That means that each month equals 30 days. All right, if there are 12 months in a year, quickly do the math, 360 days. That's really interesting, because what we talk about a prophetic year, which we see in the book of Daniel, we see in the book of Revelation, that 1,260 days or 42 months or time times and half a time, 3.5 years, they're all the same thing if a year equals 360 days. Okay, if it equals 365, it doesn't work. But if it equals 360, it works really well. Also, something to keep in mind, why do you suppose that there are 360 degrees in a circle if it's not related to the Earth going around the sun? Something to think about, right? Well, the ancients weren't stupid. They were actually quite smart. And I believe that they understood that the Earth was going around the sun 360 days, and then it started over. You might say, but wait a second, now it's 365 and a quarter. Well, there were two big things, right? You had the long day of Joshua. That's when he was fighting the Amorites. And so God made the sun stand still and the moon in its place. Very likely what God did is he may have pushed out the orbit, which would have extended the amount of days in a year. So you go from 360 to 365. There was also this other thing in the days of Hezekiah. He made the shadow go backwards a little bit. Okay, so God is kind of messing with the clock a little bit, but that's probably why we end up at 365 and a quarter. Now, there is talk in the prophetic scripture that talking about, he's going to go back to the original calendar and such. I think it's very possible that somehow, some way, I don't know how, we're going to go back to that 360-day year. How would we get there is utter speculation, okay? But somehow that is going to happen. Okay, chapter 8. Then God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark, and God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. Why? Because probably the waters that were under the continents, under the earth, right, under the ground, they were being pushed as the ground was pushing down on them, and then you had this fountain of the great deep open, like the seam on a football. Then the water was being pushed up with incredible pressure. Again, it went up, then it fell back down as rain or potentially as snow or ice. Maybe that's how it melted or how it froze the mammoths instantaneously. So all of that is happening, incredible times. And of course, eventually it's going to run out. But it was a lot of stuff. And it certainly rained like that for 40 days, 40 nights. All right. So the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month on the mountains of Ararat. So during this time, during those 150 days, you had incredible geological phenomenon happening, right? So during this time, you have the mountains are rising up, the valleys are getting deeper, right? And those valleys, guess what's following into the valley? Water, right? The water is going down into the valley. The deepest valley we know of is the Mariana Trench, which is, oh my goodness, what is it, 9,000 feet down? I mean, it's a long way down. I might be even off on that a little bit. Maybe it's 12,000, I forget. But it's a very, very deep trench. And I think it's even deeper than that, like what, 7 miles or something. I mean, it's just astounding how deep the Marianas Trench really is. All right, so again, that is the valley that came down. And guess what? All the water came down with it, right? And then where did the displacement of land go? You got to have a displacement. If it goes up, then something has to give. Then this other part, the land is going up and it's making the mountains. All right. So as the ark is going along, this earth is now coming up below it, and it's then going to rest there on Mount Ararat. Ararat's a very tall mountain, and that's where the ark is. Nobody has found it yet. People have made suggestions. They've made claims. I'm not convinced that anybody has yet found the ark. People have given it a very noble try, and I hope they find it one day. I really do. But I'm not currently convinced that anybody has actually found Noah's Ark. But things can change. I mean, maybe it'll get there. I hope so. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. All right, so from the 7th month till the 10th month, so 3 months, right? 3 months, the waters are still draining down, right? There's all this sludge and mud and all this stuff, and there's this wind blowing. God's got to repair the earth, right? It's undergone a radical change. All right. So when we start thinking about some of the ancient times, the Cambrian time, and all these supposed eras of the earth, I think they did exist, but I think they were part of the pre-flood world. And yes, you did have enormous fauna. You had really wonderful conditions for things to thrive on planet Earth, and they grew really big. You had gigantic trees and all this that would have supported this huge diet of the dinosaurs. So I'm all into that. I just don't think that it was millions of years ago. I think that it was much more recent. Even if you look in the book of Job, he talks about behemoth that I made along together with you. Behemoth was probably a sauropod dinosaur, probably a diplodocus specifically. He's got a tail that's some 40 feet long. That is a great description of a diplodocus dinosaur. It had a tail 40 feet long. We know that because they've dug them up. So there you go. All right. So all this is happening during the flood. So if people ask you, well, wait a second, when did all this stuff happen? Say, look, there was this massive flood that happened. Say, oh, yeah, where's the proof for that? Civilizations around the world, more than 200 civilizations, all talk about the flood. In my book, Corrupting Image 2, I just very briefly, I mentioned that the ancient Sumerian world, the ancient Mesopotamian world, they just take it as a matter of fact. Well, of course, there was a flood. Like, just as much as we know that there was a thing called the Civil War, or there was the Revolutionary War, or that, July 4th is when we light fireworks because that's Independence Day, right? Everybody just knows that. Nobody's debating this. That was common knowledge at the time that, yeah, of course there was a flood. We all know that. Hello, duh, right? And so there's lots of, historical evidence, somewhat anecdotal, but it's all over the place that people understood this. So where do you think humanity got this common idea? There's this thing called the flood. Yes, teacher, I think I have an idea. Maybe because there was a thing called the flood. Okay, maybe that's how it happened, right? Maybe the answer is smacking us right in the face, and there it is, because there was a thing called the flood. Now you may say, wait a second, how does all this comport, with radiometric dating and all this different stuff? Listen, before the fall, there was I repeat myself, no decay whatsoever. When Adam took a bite of that fruit, death entered in, and that's when the decay process, aka death, that's when that process started. But before the flood, it seems to have been much slower. That's why people were living up to upwards of 930, 969 years, etc., because the decay rate was relatively slow. And then what do we see after the flood? We're going to see this in the next chapter, that the time span of human life goes from 900, in the case of Noah, down to 600 for his son Shem, and then it keeps going down just like off a cliff, okay, till by the time we get to Abraham, he's at 175 years. Then Moses makes it to 120 years, right? It's going down very quickly until today. The average is between 70 and 80. Sometimes people make it to 100. Sometimes they make it to 108. But that's it, okay? So the lifespans were much longer back then, probably because the decay rate was much slower. So one of the things that a lot of scientists do when it comes to radiometric dating is they make the assumption that the decay rate has always been the same, but we don't know that. All right, you might look at a clock and say, well, 5 hours have gone by. Okay, that's great if the electricity coming in from the electric company is always at the same rate. Now, I think we have good reason to assume that in our day and age, but it's not absolutely proven. What if the oscillations were faster than 60 seconds, 60 hertz per second? What if it were faster? What if it were 300 hertz per second? Then that means our clocks would run much faster. That's the basic idea, is that before the flood, it was running much slower. And then after the flood, the decay rate was much faster, right? So we can look around at our world today and say, well, here's what we see based on the decay rates that we see in these rocks. Again, it all changed after the flood. So there's a lot of good reasons. Now, whether you think the earth is 6,000 years old or maybe 10,000 years old, that really isn't the point. The point is that it's relatively young. Okay. I do take a relatively conservative number on that. I'd say probably 6 to 10,000 years. But I'd always throw in some caveats because, well, there's a lot of things to consider. Okay. We talked about this a little bit last week when we talked about when God created the earth, right? And how he could have gotten those faraway galaxies out there without the universe being billions and billions of years old, right? There's this thing called cosmic inflation, and that would have explained a lot of it. But again, now I'm digressing. So let's keep on moving forward. So it came to pass at the end of the 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. Then he sent out a raven, which kept going to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. He also sent out from himself a dove to see if the waters had receded from the face of the ground. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot, and she returned into the ark to him, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and drew her into the ark to himself. Interesting, right? Here's a dove or a pigeon, right? These are ones that always come home, right? The raven, very smart bird, but it keeps going to and fro. We don't know exactly what happened to it, but it doesn't seem to come back, whereas the dove does come back. And he waited yet another 7 days, and again he sent the dove out from the ark. Then the dove came to him in the evening, and behold, a freshly plucked olive leaf was in her mouth, and Noah knew that the waters had receded from the earth. So he waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, which did not return again to him any more. Now it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, and the first day of the month, that the waters had dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and indeed the surface of the ground was dry. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. Then God spoke to Noah, saying, Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. All right. So where did all the animals come from? They were all on the ark. The ones before that had died. Right. So now you have these animals. And again, one of the reasons that God might have brought this batch of animals is because they didn't have any miscegenation. They didn't have any hybridization going on in them. They weren't turned into monsters or whatever was happening exactly. We don't know on the face of the earth, but God brought hand-picked animals so that the species could all continue. So Noah went out, and his sons with his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every animal, every creeping thing, every bird, and whatever creeps on the earth, according to their families, went out of the ark. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. All right, so it's a good thing that he brought more than a pair of these clean animals, because if you have 2 sheep and you kill one, well, there's no more sheep, right? So he brought 7, and this way you can take one and you still got plenty left over. Maybe that's why I even brought 7. I said 6 or I said 7 pair. I think that was a mistake on my part. But so he brought 7. All right. So you have 7. You kill one. Guess what? You're now left with male, female, male, female, male, female. Works out perfect, right? Everybody's happy. Everyone gets a mate. So that's definitely a good thing. So that nobody's sad after their time there on the ark. All right. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. Then the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I've done. While the earth remains, seedtime and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. All right, chapter 9. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth, on every bird of the air, on all that move on the ground, and on all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. So there was no dread before that. Interesting, right? That these animals were not dreading humans. That means that they probably had a much closer relationship with them, and there probably was not any type of animosity between humans and animals before the flood. Now, as part of this, God's now going to allow them to be food. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I have given you all things, even as the green herbs. All right, now this is where people say, wait a second. So I know you're into this clean eating clean animals only, but doesn't it say in Genesis chapter 9, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you? I've given you all things, even as the green herbs. So something to consider here is the green herbs are food, but guess what? Not every green thing out there is necessarily food, right? We understand that there are green herbs that we can eat, and then there's some that look like green herbs, but they'll kill us because they're poisonous. They're not for us to eat. You could try eating green leaves from a tree. We don't digest them too well. So maybe God wasn't talking about everything that's green simply because we know we cannot eat those, right? So he seems to be giving a qualifier here that just as I have given you every green herb, not every green plant, that I ever made, because some of them are not designed to be food for humans. Just like we can't eat of maple leaves. We can't eat pine needles, and those are green, but we can't eat those. And grass doesn't seem to do too well for us. So there's a specific type of herb that God is giving us to eat. And so that would also suggest that there are certain animals that we can eat as well. And guess what? Chapter 7, he already told us clean animals and unclean animals. Why go and say that if they're all just okay to eat, right? He gave a very clear distinction. Same word that we find in Leviticus chapter 11, where we distinguish between the clean animal and the unclean animal, right? So all of these things are already in there. So that's the first thing. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood. All right. So you got to kill it before you eat it. There was apparently a practice by the ancient pagans that you might instead of killing your animal, you want to keep the meat fresh. So maybe you just cut off a leg, and the animal here is now suffering, but it's still alive, and then it's going to keep the meat fresh, and then you can eat the rest of it another day. It seems like a barbaric thing to do, but God's saying, don't do that. Okay. And people have done ugly stuff, right? So don't do that. Surely for your lifeblood, I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast, I will require it, and from the hand of man. Okay, I get it that from the hand of every man's brother, I will require the life of man. I get that, right? You shall not murder because you're made in God's image. He's going to say that. But let's back up here. I will demand a reckoning from the hand of every beast. I will require it. Okay, so if an animal kills a person, the animal is in big trouble, right? That's essentially what it's saying. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? So certainly we see there are laws for that. If your ox gores somebody, then the ox is to be stoned. That's certainly part of what he's talking about. But I don't think it's only, that I own an ox and my ox goes to kill somebody, so I have to kill my ox. It also seems to be that, lions are not supposed to attack humans. Snakes are not supposed to attack humans. And if they do, then God will require a reckoning from the hand, which is interesting, from the hand of every beast, I will require it. So there's some kind of universal justice that God is going to bring about that I don't fully understand, but he's going to bring that about if an animal kills a human. Certainly in later days, it'll be the human that will take the life of that animal. But in other cases, it seems to be God will somehow handle that. And I couldn't tell you exactly how he does that. All right, so whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood will be shed. For in the image of God he made man. All right, so there we have that repeat, that the image that we are made in. And as for you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it. Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, and as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that go out of the ark with every beast of the earth. Thus I establish my covenant with you, never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. All right. So again, another reason we cannot have a local flood theory, one reason that it fails so terribly, you might say that theory doesn't hold water, is because there have been floods. I mean, there have been lots of floods. Just in my lifetime, I can think of a number of times when the Mississippi River has flooded, when you had massive flooding in Louisiana, in Florida. I mean, just recently, just last month, there was massive flooding in Fort Myers, Florida, right? Is that not flooding? Of course it is, right? If your house is underwater, that's called a flood. There's no other way to put it. So it cannot be a local flood when there are yet local floods happening. And God said that's never going to happen again. He's only talking about a universal, worldwide, whole earth, entire planet kind of flood. That is never going to happen again. So when God sends forth Yeshua, Jesus, to judge the world, it's not going to be destroyed by water, but this time by fire. All right. And that's a whole nother story, right? That's a very exciting story. But we have to understand here that what happened during the time of the flood is going to be, it's going to be modeled. Okay. The destruction that will come at the second coming will be similar in nature, but different in method. Okay. So it won't be by water, but this time by fire. And guess what? It will be the entire planet. All right. So pretty important to understand that. But God will never again do that. And God said, this is a sign of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I will set my bow et kashti natati be anan. Right. So I have set my bow in the clouds. Right. It doesn't actually say rainbow, but that's what we're talking about. So it also has this whole idea that God waged war on the earth. He put his bow in the earth and in the clouds, and he's going to leave it there. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is a sign of the covenant which I've established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Now, it's kind of ironic that the symbol for homosexuality is the rainbow. I don't suppose, I don't know, whoever created this thing, were they thinking, the rainbow. God said he'll put the rainbow in the clouds. We'll use that for homosexuality. Was that a coincidence? Was it Satan sort of directing him? Or was the person that did that rather ignorant to this fact and just came up with this idea of the rainbow? I don't know. But it is quite crazy that the very symbol that God said, hey, I'm not going to destroy the earth again by water, and I'm going to put the bow in the sky to remind you that I'll never do that again. It almost seems, maybe the individual person that created this thing wasn't thinking about it, but I'm almost certain that Satan was indeed thinking about it. And he was like, hey, let's use the rainbow, right? Because God can never destroy the earth again by water, right? And so no matter how evil and corrupt, there we go again, and of course homosexuality is it's a sexual thing, obviously. And what was happening before the flood was some type of a sexual thing, right? With the sons of God and the daughters of men, right? You had some perversion going on between different species, the angelic species and the human species, right? You had sexual relationships happening that were not supposed to be happening, and it resulted in a flood. That's kind of interesting. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. Interesting when we think about the direction that we're going. Now, we could say, well, okay, but homosexuality has been here since a long time ago. right? And certainly some Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And guess what? He destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. That was a local punishment. There's going to be a universal punishment that's coming. So I believe that homosexuality, transgender, all of these perverted sexual unions that are happening, not to forget about bestiality, all of these things are happening. But I think there's more than just that. I mean, those things are bad, but I think there's even more that's coming, which is the transformation of the human into someone who takes the mark of the beast, which, again, in my opinion, is going to be a genetic transformation. And that'll be why the people cannot go back. Once they have done that, there is no forgiveness. There is no second chance. There's no redos. They're stuck with that because they will have forever altered the image that they have been created in. And that's why it's such a serious thing. That's why God said, do not take the mark of the beast, no matter what. Again, that's another story. All right. And now the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham was the father of Canaan. Okay. Ham, one of the sons of Noah, is the father of Canaan. That means that Canaan is the grandson of Noah. You're like, yeah, Doug, I get that. I can see that. I'm saying this for a specific thing. Okay. These three were the sons of Noah. And from these, the whole earth was populated. Why is Canaan mentioned? Let's think about that. Ham was the father of Canaan. All right. Now, Noah began to be a farmer and he planted a vineyard. Okay, so some time has gone by, probably several decades, I would guess. Then he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. All right, their father's nakedness. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 18 to get the rest of the story. All right, so the nakedness of, all right. So none of you shall approach anyone who is near of kin to him to uncover his nakedness. The nakedness of your father or the nakedness of your mother, you shall not uncover. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. The nakedness of your father's wife, you shall not uncover. It is your father's nakedness. Oh my. Okay. Notice that right there. So what is your father's nakedness? His wife. And the whole context here, I hate to be so blunt, but is to have relations with your father's wife, which might be your mother. Okay. So that's kind of nasty, right? So that is a big no-no. So when we go back to Genesis chapter 9, Ham, who is the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father. Quite possibly, it's not that Noah got snookered because he drank too much and then somehow Noah or Ham went and did some homosexual act against his father, or that he merely saw his dad without clothes on. I don't think that's the case either. Based on the text there in Leviticus 18, the nakedness of your father is his wife, and you're not supposed to have relations with her. All right. So Noah woke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. Again, maybe not to his own personal body, but that to his wife. Okay. Then he said, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, he shall be to his brethren. And he said, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. All right. So what seems to be the case here is that Canaan comes along later, right? Now, again, we have massive breaks in the story, right? These are just the highlights of the life of Noah. First of all, bad people on the earth, okay? Fallen angels. Then we have the flood, okay? Build an ark, right? And then they're on the ark for a while, and then they get off the ark. And then God puts the rainbow in the sky. And then one more thing, by the way, because this is kind of important, is that, well, Noah gets a vineyard, and then Ham does something with his father's nakedness, which seems to be his mother, Ham's mother, Noah's wife. All right. So now I guess it's possible that maybe he's not or she is not their mother. I don't know. That's speculation. Anyway, but in any event, Canaan came about as a result of Ham, obviously. And which woman? That's the real question. Who is the mother of Canaan? My argument is that it's Noah's wife. And that is why Noah curses Canaan. This would make sense. Why else curse him? Just because you saw your dad naked? No, that doesn't make any sense. You saw your dad without clothes on? No, it's because you uncovered the nakedness of your father, which is his wife, and then you had relations with her. All right. So the Bible's being rather gentle about how it's saying this, but it's still saying it. All right. Don't have relations with these type of people. Okay. Don't do it with her, and don't do it with her. All right. So the Bible has very clear instructions as to who you can have relations with and who you can't have relations with. And this seems to be why Canaan is cursed, is because his dad did something that was a big no-no. And yeah. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years. So all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. All right. Genesis chapter 10. Oh my goodness. There's still so much amazing stuff. Now, this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah. Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Yavan, Tubal, Meshech, Tiras. It's kind of interesting, right? We have some names that are going to show up later in the book of Ezekiel. And so what's happening here is these are talking about big families are going to become nations. They're going to keep these same names in the book of Ezekiel, but we're going to know them by different names. And Madai is probably the Medes. Yavan is certainly the Greeks. Some of the other ones are a little bit trickier. Okay, the sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz. We talk about the Ashkenazi Jews. So people say, well, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. Well, look, because we know that Japheth is not the same as Shem, right? So if you have Ashkenazi Jews, sometimes people make this argument, Ashkenazi Jews can't possibly be real Jews because they're not even of this line of Shem. Well, it doesn't make sense. So Ashkenaz was a guy, right? And he had kids, of course. But then they also settled in a particular place, which is called the land of Ashkenaz, right? And still known today as Ashkenaz. And that's why you have Ashkenazi Jews, just like you have Sephardic Jews, Sfarad, which is Spain. All right. So it doesn't mean that the Jews from Spain are somehow biologically Spanish, but they've been living there, and so they become known as Spanish Jews. So you have American Jews, right? But again, they're Jews who've been living in America. That's the point. And so you have Jews that were living in the area of Ashkenaz, and so they're known as Ashkenazi Jews, even though Ashkenaz was not from the line of Shem. I hope that makes sense, because I know that gets a little bit confusing. But in any event, and from these, the coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. The son of Ham were Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabtecha, and the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. Cush begot Nimrod. Oh, wait a second. Let's go back here. So the sons of Ham were Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan, right? So Ham, Cush, Nimrod. Nimrod began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. In the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Oh, well, where is this Shinar? Shinar, you may ask, or you might want to know, is Shnei Ne'arim, which is the two rivers. This is also known as Sumer, from the Sumerian people. So Shumer, Shinar, they're the same exact word. just different inflections on them, of course. But Shnei Ne'arim, the two rivers. Two rivers, what would that be in Greek? Oh yeah, Mesopotamia, between the rivers, right? So Mesopotamia, that's the same area that we're talking about. And of course, this is where we find these cities, Babel or Babylon, Erech, Akkad, right? So that's the area of the Akkadian Empire, Calneh. And then he went from that land, he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehovot, Ir, Calah, Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah, that is the principal city. All right, so we know where these places are. Now, Nimrod, it probably was not his name, because his name means let's rebel. So it's unlikely that anybody's going to name their son Let's Rebel. I don't know. I can't imagine him, right? You're like, honey, what should we call him? How about Let's Rebel? It seems like a stretch to me. So that's probably an epithet he got later in life. Now, if you study this, and again, I talk about this in Corrupt the Image Volume 2, Nimrod in the ancient world was known as Nin Urta, which means Lord of the Earth. And I think the Bible actually took the name Nin Urta and modified it to be Let's Rebel. All right. So I think the Bible was taking this guy that was known in history and saying, you're not the Lord of the Earth. That's what you think you are. But what you really are is Let's Rebel. All right. So that's my argument. Again, you can take that or leave that. But I think I make a pretty good argument for that in Corrupt the Image Volume 2. So you may want to check that out. There's so much more to say about Nimrod. Okay. I mean, he became a Gibor. That is a big deal. So he didn't start as a Gibor, a mighty one, right here. So the Hebrew there is Gibor. He didn't start that way. He became that way. Now, if we look at this in the Septuagint, what we find is that Nimrod, he became a Gigas, okay? So Erxato ine Gigas, right? He began to be a Gigas. What is a Gigas? Well, this is someone who is of the earth and of the sky, right? So this is an earthborn one. This word in ancient Greek was talking about the demigods. Okay, they were known as the Gigas, or the Titans in some cases. We find the word Titan used in Scripture as well. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that you find in Scripture that you think, oh, that's just Greek mythology. Well, maybe the Greeks were getting their mythology from somebody. In fact, we can trace Ninurta to Heracles or Hercules. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. And by the way, Ninurta was said to be the son of Enlil, who separated heaven and earth. Enlil, I show in Corrupt the Image Volume 2, is absolutely Satan. And he's the one who separated heaven and earth. And that's pretty much the narrative that we see of him in the entire Bible. And he's quite proud of that claim. So Nimrod, well, let's go back to Ninurta, his Mesopotamian name. He was said to be the son of Enlil. Now, what are some of the epithets that we hear about the beast? Well, he's called the man of sin and the son of perdition. That's interesting, right? Maybe that's because maybe he was the son of Enlil, the son of Satan. That's the argument that I make in Corrupt the Image Volume 2, that he actually became, he was transformed, and he turned into something different. He went from being your basic human to then being, well, should we say human plus or maybe human minus? I can't quite decide. Okay. But he was no longer just your average human. Let's put it that way. All right. He was definitely something else. And it seems that he became a gigas. He became a hybrid. And then he did all these, naughty things. Mitzrayim begot Ludim, Ananim, Lehabim, Naftuhim, Pathrusim, and Kaluchim, from whom came the Philistines and Kaphtorim. Of course, they're going to be significant later on. Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Het, the Jebusite, the Amorite, the Girgashite, the Hivite, the Achrite, and the Sinite, the Arvadite. I always find this one kind of funny because I live in the city of Arvada, and this is where this word comes from. The Zemarite and the Hamatite. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites were dispersed, and the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, as far as you go toward Gerar, as far as Gaza. Then you go towards Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim as far as Lasha. These were the sons of Ham according to their families, according to their languages and their lands and their nations. And the children were born also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, right, who is the Hebrew, the brother of Japhet, the elder. The sons of Shem were Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arphaxad begat Salah, and Salah begat Ever. To Ever were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Yoktan. All right. Peleg, because it was divided. What does this mean, right? This is one of these challenging things. It could be, all right? I'm saying this with a big grain of salt. It could be that we went from essentially a Pangea type situation, and then the continents really drifted apart at that point. That's a possibility. I think another possibility is that there may have been a lot of land bridges, because there could have been a lot more snow and ice. Probably during this time, you also have the ice age that's happening, and then it melts and it keeps melting until, guess what? There's no more land bridges, and this is when the earth is divided. So I think that's probably the more likely scenario. When I think the Pangea supercontinent split up, I would argue that happened probably during the time of the flood. So the waters on the earth, and God is shaking it up all around, right? And things are going under massive cataclysmic changes, geologically speaking. So probably, in my opinion, what happened in the days of Peleg is that you had huge ice caps at the poles, all coming down into parts of North America, coming down into parts of Northern Europe, and then that water simply melted. And then you could not get across these land bridges that were there much of the time, and then suddenly they were gone. All right. So that's how I would put that. All right. So we have all these different names. These were the sons of Yoktan, and their dwelling place was from Mesha as you go towards Sephar, the mountain of the east. These were the sons of Shem according to their families, according to the languages and their lands. These are the families of the sons of Noah according to the generations in their lands. And from these, the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. Okay, now chapter 11 fits into chapter 10, right? This happens again and again and again in Scripture. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Genesis 2 fits into Genesis chapter 1, but it's an expansion of day 6. All right, so chapter 11 is an expansion of what happened in the days of Nimrod, okay? So just understand that. These are not in chronological order, just as the same thing we have in the book of Revelation. Those are not necessarily in chronological order either, though people often read it that way, and I think it causes a lot of confusion. Now, the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, again, Sumer, or Mesopotamia, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore, its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Okay, so remember, who was the one who established Babel? It was Nimrod. Okay, so Nimrod very much has a hand in this city. Notice that the whole earth has one language and one speech. If we look at ancient Mesopotamian documents, which again I talk about in Corrupting Image Volume 2, the ancients understood that there was a tower that was erected. The gods didn't like it. They came down and scrambled the languages, and then people started speaking different languages. And before this time, people were living much longer lives. These are in other documents, not the Bible, but in other documents. Now, what's interesting is the time of Nebuchadnezzar in the Neo-Babylonian time. He and his father before him Nabonidus, they were actually working on reconstructing a tower that had been built some 42 generations earlier. And they said, look, we didn't build this. We're just fixing it up. It was built a long time ago. We're trying to fix it back up. I do believe that is the actual Tower of Babel. I know there's some debate about that, but that's my opinion, that that is the actual Tower of Babel. And they were trying to reconstruct it, right? So we actually have these documents, right? Nebuchadnezzar himself saying that this is what he was up to. Now, why were they trying to build this tower? Were they trying to get up really close to the sky and then somehow put their hand out and touch it? No, of course, it had nothing to do with that. The word Bab-el, it actually means gate of the gods. You might say, well, wait a second, but it says here, so therefore the name is called Babel because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. Well, what do you think of when I say Chernobyl? You probably think of nuclear meltdown, right? So the word Chernobyl has become synonymous with nuclear meltdown, right? So Babel became synonymous with the confusion of languages, right? Or just making nonsense talk. All right. So, okay. Because, he confused the language right there. There's no question about that. But again, Babel itself, Babel meaning confusion of languages, is probably a later usage of the word. Words take on different meanings over time. Okay. The word nice, it used to mean silly. Okay. A lot of words change depending on how they're being used. Take the word gay. It used to mean happy. Now it means, well, who knows? Okay. But there's a lot of words that change their meaning. So Babel was gate of the gods. And if you look in Arabic, for example, Bab means gate. If you look at ancient Akkadian, Bab means gate, El means gods. All right. So this was the gateway of the gods. What I think Satan was trying to do is he was trying to open a portal between heaven and earth. And if you look at the ancient Mesopotamian documents, that's exactly what it says they were trying to do, is they were trying to create a nexus, a portal between this world and that world. And I think they were really close. And I think this is why God had to come down. It's not just they were making a tall building. God is not against tall buildings. He couldn't be. The New Jerusalem is a very tall building, okay? So he's not against tall buildings, but he's against buildings that could radically destroy human life, right? And remember, in the flood, there was a huge existential crisis for humanity, and that's why God had to intervene. Here again, at the Tower of Babel, there was an existential crisis that could affect all humanity, and that's why God had to intervene, right? So again, he's not against tall buildings. All right, so I'm going to skip a lot of this. Okay, we did get through a lot of this, and then of course we have the introduction of Noah. All right, so we're going to stop there because we're just running out of time. All right, but there was so much exciting stuff in there, and I am just so delighted that you guys joined me. Thank you for just saying shalom in the chat. That's pretty awesome. So thanks again, guys. It's always good to have you with me. I do hope you'll consider going with me to Israel in 2024. Go to thewaycongregation.com to get more information about that. You can also become a partner with this ministry. You can go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp, and you can give $5 a month, $50, $500, whatever you want to give is fine. Is really up to you, of course. But I just want you to know everything helps. So thank you very much for that. And I do hope you'll join us tomorrow night for the Prophecy Roundtable. We got some exciting stuff. We're going to talk about the millennium. I'm excited about that one. And then, of course, on Shabbat, we are going through 1 Samuel. Great stuff in store. So please do join me for that. Come hang out with us if you are in Lakewood. Until then, until next time.